Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us. We've got a great panel with us right now. My name's Velshi. I'm the chief business correspondent for CNN and the anchor of CNN's business show, Your Money. I also anchor CNN every day from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock. So I once again am retaining my title as the guy who is on every single day at CNN. But one of the things that is sort of a legacy with me is to come here and turn off my BlackBerry, first of all. That's just because we're at like a digital session, so I figured I'd be cool and keep it on. Is to come here and take part in the fantastic discussions that always take place, thanks to Louise and her team. It's just a great incubator for ideas, a great exchange of ideas. I've always thought this is a fantastic summit, but it's more so today as we so carefully follow what's going on in the world and in politics. You know, we've emerged from, probably emerged from the worst of the financial crisis that we've seen for the last 2 years. And I remember it was exactly 2 years ago today, we were in the middle of the worst of the panic of the financial crisis. It really had hit a great pace around September 14th, 2008, with the collapse of Lehman Brothers. And it didn't, the beginning of the end didn't start until Friday, October 3rd, when the bailout bill was first passed. So we were right smack dab in the middle of it. We were still a week away from even looking like there might be a solution. And I remember this event that week. Money was very hard to come by. You had people here who were talking about how deals couldn't be made. It was a tumultuous time. And we're well beyond that, but the world's no easier to understand today. It's more complex, and as Louise was just saying a few moments ago privately, there's a tenor in our conversation that is absent. There's a respect in our discourse in politics that is absent, and nowhere more so than right now in the United States, 40 days away from an election. That's not how things get solved, and that's why events like this are much bigger than what they seem to be, because this is an invitation. In fact, one of the last panels that took place earlier discussing Middle East peace. I mean, we're 2 days away from something else that's about to happen that may derail those conversations. So having a place that is a safe place to come to and have discussions like this is remarkably important. So thank you for that, Louise. The good fortune I have is rather than dealing with the turmoils in the world of business and economics that I deal with all week and the turmoils in the rest of the news, I get to actually talk about a topic that is probably going nowhere but good places. And it is the use of digital technology to create new societies, to create new networks. It is something that has emerged seemingly spontaneously over the last several years, except as my panelists here will tell you, wasn't all that spontaneous. It's because there were smart people, including some of the people on this stage, who decided that this is what the world is going to look like. If democracy is not catching on as quickly as we'd like it to do, let's democratize through technology and through digital technology, and let's open our minds to the biggest possibilities we can have. And that's where we are today. We've got people on this stage representing companies or ideas that are entirely central to the way we do business, the way we contact people, the fact that the internet is no longer either one-way or two-way, but it is multi-way, and that our ability to communicate with people is so multifaceted, instant, and rich with content that we don't actually even know how to use it fully yet. So I want to invite my guests, first of all, to just sort of throw out their most potent thoughts and ideas about where this can go, where it is, what our speed bumps are, and where it can go. And then we're going to turn it around. They'll hopefully have some things to say about each other's ideas, but really this is an opportunity to hear from you and to have some of the smartest minds in digital technology and social networking right here on the stage with us. I want to start with Craig Newmark of the eponymous Craigslist.
Folks, the social media technology has been very effective in the past. It's been used for quite a while. My favorite examples are a pairing between Gutenberg and Luther, who used the social media of their time on a grassroots basis. It was pretty effective. The big lesson is that, of course, you lose control of your message immediately, which is why we have many Protestant churches. But the deal is it's an old technology, it's effective, people are using it now to affect much greater change, and we're making it happen.
I wasn't even finished writing down all of your names. But thank you. I did ask everybody to keep their initial thoughts very short so we can get into it. I want to introduce you to Jeff Friedberg. He's the Chief Trust Architect for Microsoft because as this digital technology has emerged as rapidly as it has, trust and privacy, as we know, continue to be major concerns. Several years ago, those were concerns that kept people away from digital technology. They kept them from fully engaging. That's not the case now because it's not practical to be away from it, but we have a whole new set of trust issues. Jeff?
So just to throw something out there, you know, trust is putting something of value at risk. And so the scope of, say, social change, what's the risk? Well, you know, you put your ideas, your thoughts out there, you join various groups. Well, you've got, going back to the UDHR, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, of freedom of association and freedom of thought. If there is concern that there's going to be a backlash because of something you say or some group you join, that could be a real damper on what goes on within the social networking space. And so it really suggests that all of us need to work very hard on ensuring a level of trust within these systems so that people don't hesitate to engage and share. I know I've mentioned in other talks that I support an effort called End-to-End Trust, and it really seeks to create a safer, more trusted internet. One of the building blocks that would be needed in this particular case is certainly identity, being able to identify people. And the real trick is making sure it's a continuum of identity. If you look at our national strategies for trusted identities in cyberspace, they want something that's really heavily verified, that's in-person proved. That might put a damper on freedom of speech and might worry people that they're very closely associated with their thoughts. A full continuum where you can be mostly anonymous might be very useful. And it's also useful to be known that you're part of a group without having to say who you are. So these are technologies that are coming online to help finesse this continuum of identity, which might actually help stimulate the social change that I'm sure all the other speakers will talk about.
Thank you for that, Jeff. Gary Flake is the technical fellow at Microsoft, and he deals with a lot of the things where you touch where you touch the internet: search, advertising, content, portals, community, and of course, application development. Craig, what are your views?
Gary.
I'm sorry, Gary. I'm looking at Craig. I'm thinking of Craig, and I'm talking to you.
So call me Gary.
You're Gary for the rest of the afternoon.
I'd like to take a stab at throwing an idea out to you. It's about the intersection of society and the internet at sort of the 50,000-foot level. Now, for me, the really important thing about the entire convergence of society into this digital world is really 2 points. First, as you mentioned, the sort of democratization of participation. So across the board on everything from publishing to creating to commerce to connecting, all these different domains, we've seen the barriers lowered so that virtually anyone across the world can participate. The second thing is that when you have a critical mass of participation, a couple of things happen. First of all, you get a lot more data than you had ever seen before. And so what I would like for you to think about is the idea that there can be a network effect in having a critical mass of data. We've seen this many times over within the realms of economics. A marketplace, after all, is a network effect of buyers and sellers able to transact in a very liquid and fluid way. Well, when you have information flowing in a similar digital marketplace, maybe not with digital goods, but in somewhere where you can actually have the transformation and the transfer of content and ideas, then you can have a similar sort of network effect at work. And I wish Jimmy Wales was here. He was originally scheduled to be here, but Wikipedia is one of these wonderful examples where you can end up with an artifact that's vastly greater and more important than the contribution of any one individual and more than the sum of the contributions. So that is what our digital world evolving to could actually usher for the rest of the world if we architect it correctly.
that'll be an interesting question for us to discuss, is how you architect it correctly. I sort of started on this side, and I started with Craig because in my puny little mind, I could understand what the product that he developed. Now, as we go here, we're getting into territory that I don't actually understand. Nathan, I'm not even really going to fully be able to explain what you do at txteagle, except to say that Nathan's, like everybody here, a very smart guy, but he's developed he formed this company in 2008 with the goal of enabling 2 billion, 2 billion people who use mobile phones living in the developed world to generate income using their phones, and that makes it the largest not-for-profit mobile phone company operating in Africa. Nathan was also named one of the world's top mobile phone developers in 2008 by Nokia. He's one of the top innovators in the space. Nathan, your views?
Okay. I think, so we've got a panel of technologists here. And I think, so the hat that I'm going to wear today is not necessarily that of technologist, but rather that of the developing world. And so exclusively, whether it's from my academic perspective or from my entrepreneurial perspective, I really like to think about the impact that technology can have and social media can have on these emerging markets. And I think it's something that is not necessarily first and foremost of what people think of when they think of the internet. But the majority of people who are online today live in the developing world. When people think of a mobile phone, you think of an iPhone. You think of people, the average user being someone, like an individual in this room. But ultimately, there are far more mobile phone subscribers in the developing world than there are in the developed world. The mobile phone has had a far greater impact on their lives than it has on ours. And so ultimately, the mobile phone, and I think to some degree the internet, it's a developing world technology, and there's so many exciting things that can happen once we start really thinking about going from what Gary said about leveraging big data, looking at data coming from these devices and coming from usage patterns in these emerging markets. There's a lot of exciting things that can happen, ranging from helping urban planners design better cities in these African capital cities to computational epidemiologists trying to figure out how disease will disseminate across a host population in a place like India. So I'm really excited. I think the technology in these emerging markets is a space that more people should be excited about too.
It is fantastic that you all have such expertise in what we are calling this topic, but you all do it so differently and have such different applications to it. No different for Chris Hughes at the end, who was actually a co-founder of Facebook. He was the site's first spokesperson. He was a product manager specializing in the user experience at Facebook. In 2007, Chris went on to work for President Barack Obama's presidential campaign. He was the director of online organizing. He oversaw the development of myBarackObama.com. Now he is working on a new initiative called Jumo, which is designed to use the social web to foster long-term relationships of responsibility between individuals and organizations who are working to change the world. Chris.
Thanks. Well, I'd like to try to sort of synthesize a few of the different ideas that I think have been put out there by Greg and Craig and the rest of the panel, and also introduce a little bit of observations from my own experience. I think it's right to note that we are in the midst of a technological revolution. It's almost become a hackneyed phrase. And it's also right to note that the power of networks is really immense. There are emergent properties when nodes or individuals are connected to one another that introduce new possibilities for collaboration, which we shouldn't underestimate. At the same time, I do think that it's quite dangerous to think that networks emerge spontaneously. I think that what I've seen in my experience and what I've observed on the internet is that the structures that individuals participate in define the actual participation in the first place. And a lot of times you need a really clear structure to make the network work more efficiently. So to speak more specifically, in the case of Facebook, Facebook emerged in 2004 in the midst of a bit of a social networking revolution on the internet. You'd had precursors like a lot of the blogging sites pop up in 2002, 2003. You then had MySpace, you had Friendster, you had a lot of different players in the field. So what made Facebook the difference? Why did Facebook win? Why does it have 500 million active users today? It's because the network had a much clearer structure around it than any of the others. It was closed from the start and remains semi-closed today. And it was also focused on making sure that users were replicating their real-life identities. These were constraints that we put on the network in particular, and it made it stronger. Same thing goes on the Obama campaign. When we launched all of our software, we definitely wanted to enable grassroots action, but inside constraints that would actually help us win more votes and win the election, not just to build buzz or to build excitement or to increase a brand's recognition like Obama as a person. And then the final thing that I'll note is what I'm working on now is trying to apply that same philosophy to the social sector, which is roughly about 7% of global GDP. NGOs, not-for-profits, government programs, you name it. There's no system to connect these groups online. There's no superstructure. And as a result, it's very difficult for everyday people to find individuals or organizations that are important to them, let alone stay in touch or support them. So I'd love to brainstorm how that might work better on the panel today.
God, I moderated a panel last night, and nobody listened to any of the instructions. These guys were brief, concise, and introduced great points. I'm going to invite you out there to ask questions. I also want to welcome my panelists to take issue with or elaborate on something that someone else said. Again, I do find it interesting. You're all in sort of different spaces, but you're all pioneers of what we're experiencing right now. So my curiosity, obviously, as somebody in media, is how far this takes us. We already know, for instance, at CNN, that our digital distribution is on track to, it is bigger than our television distribution and continues to be on track to be a bigger deal, but it's not the same as television distribution. We thought it was making sure that you could get your news through texts or on your device or on your phone or watch it streaming. That's actually not the big gain. It's the interaction that our viewers, they become participants with us. And that's an entirely different set of consumers than we're typically used to. It's not the same person. Our demographic of people who traditionally watch CNN on TV is entirely different than the demographic of people who want to interact with us, and that's got more to do with the demographics that you're all in common with. A younger demographic that is typically more used to a multifaceted channel of communication.
Yeah. I have said that the media and political landscapes in 2020 are going to be pretty different than they are in 2010 right now. People are talking about news curation. How do you find the news that you trust? And nowadays, frankly, even though I'm a man in my declining years, I do like what the kids do, and I get news largely curated on Twitter and Facebook and RSS streams from people I know and trust. This means that the individual brands and media and so on, brands of people or small groups, may become more important than that of big organizations. This is changing now, it's changing already, and I have a feeling the pace of change is accelerating. No one knows for sure, but we are living in the most interesting of times from the perspective of politics and media, and especially how they integrate. The Tea Party, that is the genuine parts of it that are grassroots, are the best illustration of this.
Again, just give me a hand if you want to get in on the conversation. Nathan, one of the things that we see differently in the rest of the world than we do in the United States is we've had a later proliferation of the use of mobile phones other than for use as a telephone in the United States than in many parts of the world, particularly in places like Africa or in the developing world. What I've been fascinated to learn lately is the types of applications that you're discussing that can provide people the ability to generate income. One of them that was being discussed at the X Prize recently was the idea of delivering medical diagnoses to people who would otherwise have no access to a doctor, or no clear access to a doctor, but would have access to a cell phone. Sure. Take us into sort of the brave new world beyond the obvious. The applications that you study and you work on and you develop are beyond fun things you can do with your phone.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just me who's developing. I mean, ultimately, a lot of the things that I do leverage technology that has been deployed in these emerging markets, and the technology doesn't necessarily exist in this market. I mean, I was in Nairobi recently and was taking a cab to the airport to get back home. And what was great was I didn't have to keep any Nairobi Kenyan shillings in my wallet to pay for that taxi cab ride. I mean, I could pay with my mobile phone. And I was flying actually into the heart of Silicon Valley, and there's no way that cab driver picking me up in San Jose would take any type of payment from my fancy iPhone. Right? So people wave their arms a lot about leapfrog technology and how the developing world is leapfrogging the developed world. But in some instances, it's real, it's happening. In some cases, these markets fundamentally do have technological platforms that ultimately are many years ahead of, unfortunately, what we have in this country. And what's exciting about that is that's where we're seeing a lot of innovation take place. Leveraging the fact that you can now send money from one phone to another phone means so many different things. And we're just on the tip of the iceberg of figuring out what. I have a company that enables people to earn money. So thinking about phones no longer as a communication device exclusively, but rather as a mechanism for compensation. And so with partnerships now with 230 mobile phone operators in 80 countries, we've deployed this platform that can enable now over 2 billion people to be instantly compensated. And what I'm trying to do, my full-time job now, I've left my positions in academia. My full-time job is to answer this one question. And the question is, why are we compensating them? What can these individuals, what can these 2 billion people in these developing world countries, what can they do to offer value and I believe fundamentally they do have value, whether it's to provide information about market research or local data or translations, and it's just now it's a question of getting the right work to the right individuals. So ultimately, yeah, I mean, I think this type of technology has had a profound social impact and has had it in the developing world.
Jeff, it doesn't seem like the developing world has taken as long to establish trust in digital transactions, trust in the use of this technology as we have. Is that just because we started earlier and things weren't as good? Because I don't know why Nathan can't do that in San Francisco, but we do seem to take longer to develop these or to adopt some of these technologies.
I know that in emerging markets and developing nations that to run a lot of traditional infrastructure is very expensive, and so they leapfrog to cell phones, among other things. And so they're suddenly just immersed in this sort of way of doing things because that's the way you do it. And here we're still evolving from all the things that we used to use, although there's obviously a rapid change where people adopt. I will say this, though, the thing about people's expectations and their mental models of things, the people participating in social networks today, I think, have a challenge because a lot of them don't have, say, a certain framing for things like privacy. And I mentioned harm at the beginning and trust and those elements. And to the degree that information that they're sharing to create these social networks actually comes back to bite them over time, say they don't get their job or something like that because of something they posted. I think I cited some number for recruiters using this information. We'll look at social sites, and I think 70% have rejected candidates based on what they've seen on the sites. Now, to the extent that that enters into the psyche of people who are users, that ends up being a slight damper to the exuberance of jumping on these systems and just wanting to put everything out there. So there's an evolution, I think, that has to happen, and it's different for different age groups.
There is a generation gap in the way people perceive privacy and what's acceptable online. Someone as far into his dotage as I am, for example, there's some things that I'm glad I've never put online and won't, but people under 30 are sometimes quite happy, sometimes causing internal family scandals by virtue of what elements of their new lifestyle they'll put on Facebook. So the idea is there really is this generation gap. Things are changing, and unfortunately, since hiring managers tend to be well beyond that age of 30 or whatever, there have been many job rejections and other issues as a result of this.
And let me just tie one last piece, and that's the usability question. I think people should make their own choices on what they consider to be norms for their privacy, what they're comfortable with and whatever. The challenge as technologists who provide services is how do you present such options to people and allow them to form a mental model so they're setting those things correctly so they don't accidentally share an embarrassing photo, which might be fine for family, with their employer, right? And don't make that silly mistake. And you know, to everyone's credit, people are trying to get new privacy options out there, but we still lack a certain amount of rigor in this trust user experience issue I mentioned earlier about people being in the hot seat making trust decisions and not being able to effectively do them because they don't have the right mental model for what they're being asked.
We're having a fun conversation, but again, I invite you to come in. Gary, or Craig, whatever you want to call yourself today, you mentioned something very interesting to me, and you talked about Wikipedia, for instance, being a great example of something where the sum of it is more than
Greater than
the sum of its parts, and greater than that yet, and that's what our end result of all of this can be if we build it properly, if we have the right architecture. I don't know what that means. So
let me use some examples from people on the panel here that we've all been kind of dancing around some similar themes. Let me put it to you this way: you can design a city so that the wrong combination of anonymous interactions and lack of privacy or other properties make it so that people are antisocial. Where the repeated interactions are such that they're incented not to actually cooperate. Maybe instead they're incented to be almost hostile to each other. Similarly, in an online community, you can design an online community to have good properties and bad properties in terms of what it means. And I think that the example that we heard earlier about the evolution of why did Facebook win versus MySpace? Well, to get right down to it, one of the reasons why is because when you were at a Facebook page, you knew it was a Facebook page. But if you were at a MySpace page, you had no idea that's what it was. And that is very similar to what happens within societies when we develop cultural norms or when we develop protocols for the right way of actually carrying on something like a transaction. So the idea of architecting a network or architecting an application or architecting the internet to make it conducive to cooperation is absolutely critical in terms of how society evolves. Because if we do it the right way, we'll have the best of all worlds. We'll have the benefit of having some of the value of mainstream journalism with some of the cutting, insightful pieces that no blogger, no one on Twitter is ever going to have the time or the patience to investigate months or maybe years into a story. But we'll also have the benefit of blogging and tweeting, where you have the sort of zeitgeist of the moment and the most rapid response possible. The ideal is really having a world in which all those things can coexist and each can make the other a little bit better. That's a pattern that I think we'll see repeated, not just in news, not just in social networking, but in commerce, in entertainment, and numerous other domains. And so by that, architecting for success means making it so that the participation of many is rewarded and rewarding to all and not a detriment.
Chris, I think you're, from what I've read, Jumo is shaping up to be that kind of thing. An infrastructure where people of goodwill across the world can pretty much stand up for the good work that other people do in an ever-growing self-organizing network. That's the feel I have for it.
Yeah, the idea behind what I'm building now, but also the more general point here, I think, is if you make it easy for people to do things that they're already familiar with or they're inclined to do, they'll be much more likely to do it. And if we can build those technologies in a smart enough way that provide users with a degree of comfort and security and trust, and also with the incentives to return on a regular enough basis, then you can get real value out of it. And so to talk to your point, Craig, I mean, the social sector is a really, really diverse one. And we all have different passions. We all have different interests. And right now, we're reduced to reading a newspaper article or reading a tweet or seeing any piece of content and saying, wow, that's crazy. But what can I do to help? And the behavior that we've learned, because that's been the only option for the past, up until this point, has been to say, well, I care about that, and I'll move on to the next article, I'll move on to the next thing. So the opportunity, I think, is to build a network to make it very easy for people to actually connect to another person, another organization, whatever that unit is, whatever that node is, that's actually implementing a solution or a set of solutions, and then substantively keep up with them over a long period or over a period of time. So that's what we're taking on.
Craig just called your network self-organizing. Do you want to push back on that? Is that, I mean, you mentioned about how much structure is enough structure? I mean, when I think of self-organizing networks, I think of no rules and just having these emergent properties, just emergent behavior appear out of nothing. But they kind of push back from what you originally said about the success of Facebook.
Well, I think all systems have rules.
Yeah.
And those rules can either be set as rules as in standards of behavior, some of which can be where you err from a standard can be penalized, or in other cases it's just not incentivized. But the systems always have standards. It's a question of how consistent they're applied and how much a network necessarily embraces them. So if you think about some of the big consumer web companies that are all the rage here in the United States these days, like Foursquare, for instance, or Yelp, or a few others, a lot of these companies provide a great deal of structure. Yelp is a good example. They are a service where you can find a restaurant or a barber or a plumber, whatever you need in your local community, but that's seeded with the yellow pages to start. And the community can come in and create listings, they can review, you can recommend, it's a social application. But once again, there you find a balance between community participation and a bit of structure in around it. So to answer your question, what we're building is really similar to that. There's a bit of structure around around people, organizations, and issues, but we also have the doors wide open so that anybody can edit an organization's page, anybody can create a new one, and hopefully anybody can connect to the ones that already exist.
Anybody got any questions yet? Because we can just keep on talking. We're enjoying. Okay, here we go. You're going to ruin our party for us. I'm joking.
Sorry, Jared McKeown, Black Tie Magazine. I happen to have a pretty substantial website, but can I ask you a really hard question? Just as an example, we've had primary elections in New York. We had, I think, 9 contended districts in the whole city. How soon are we looking at our first digital election, maybe in the States or in the third world? I mean, how serious is this as a possibility as for national elections, and how soon?
That's an excellent, excellent question. When you were talking about how the elections of 2020 are going to be governed by something entirely different than we are now, I was thinking about how old-fashioned this particular midterm that we're in seems to be.
Well, people have been talking about electronic voting machines for some time. The problem that's held that back has been that the voting machines, they had a so-called closed architecture. You couldn't look at the code, and so people felt that they couldn't trust it. And in fact, sometimes when the code was forced open, they found things like bugs and even worse things. It was complicated too by the CEO of one of the manufacturers, one of the major manufacturers of the machines, said that actually he would take some measures to make sure his candidates won. So it's been artificially delayed in the US. But beyond that, I may not care very much, because what matters to me, frankly, are getting people together of goodwill to connect for those purposes, like we saw starting in the last presidential election and beyond that with the Dean campaign.
So you mean the electronic voting is a sort of less significant than digital media or social networking,
yeah,
getting people to go out and vote or getting people to understand the cause?
I mean, I'm like a total nerd, and I do love technology, but the people matters are far more important.
Chris, what do you think of that? As a guy who's done the political side of it.
I have a couple different thoughts. I mean, in general, I share sympathies with Craig. I would like to see it be much easier just to vote. And it's not just the voting moment, but the registration process and everything that goes into finding your polling location and the logistics around voting in general. But I do think that politics and the law are some of the most intransigent traditions and institutions. I mean, I think that one of the big reasons why you can't actually pay a taxi driver in San Jose with your phone is the legal restrictions around the banking and financial industry, which perhaps the spirit of the law is right, but it's much more difficult to innovate in this space as a startup, and there's not as much of an incentive for the larger banks or financial institutions to make that possible. Similarly with politics, I mean, to editorialize a little bit about this particular past couple years, I mean, we had a real grassroots movement in the country in 2007 and 2008, and I'm very young, but I think it had been a really long time since that energy was felt across the country. And that has not transferred over now 2 years into the presidency. And we can talk about a lot of reasons why and speculate on that. But I think that the meta point, or the point that I take away from it, is that government and the institutions and traditions that exist in it are very, very hard to change, even in the midst of a technological and social revolution, as I think we're experiencing.
So I just wanted to tie back to the e-voting question. And I think there's a difference between electronic voting machines, which is one set of issues, and doing online voting, where you're sitting in your bathrobe making a vote. And in the dream state of being able to do the latter, what's the properties you're looking for? You're looking for being able to vote anonymously, but making sure people only vote once, right? So how do you do that?
And that the system's secure.
And that the system's secure. And so one of the things I brought up earlier, which is the identity continuum, here's a case where you need in-person proofing or verified identity, possibly gotten from like a DMV, some kind of motor vehicle department that verifies it's you. But then the state issues you something called a claim that basically says, I belong to a particular jurisdiction. And then I can present that claim online as in one-time shot to say, I have a right to vote here for this thing, all right? And then you tie the physical world to the real world. So that's the kind of stuff you have to be able to eventually do.
From your world, are we close? I mean, how technologically close are we to being able to achieve all of the security that you just talked about?
So the whole idea of going to a claims-based system rather than handing an identity that says everything about you, because it has to be anonymous, right?
Right.
You just want to know you're in the jurisdiction, not who you are.
Right.
And you're only counted once, those properties. Those are really desirable attributes for privacy advocates. And we all would like to, for example, if you walked into a bar, what do you do today? You have to present your driver's license. And the bouncer looks at it, and they not just see your birthday. And by the way, it's an age test, right? Are you over 21? But that's not what they see. They see your actual birthday. They also see where you live, a bunch of other things. So if they wanted to stalk you, they could. There's a lot of extra information being provided in that social context. But the bar accepts the state-issued identity. So to the extent that you want to leverage the existing infrastructure, you might actually have motor vehicle departments issue such credentials after doing an in-person proof.
That basically says positively you are entitled to vote in this place.
And they can make a claim that you were over 21 to the bar without telling them how old you actually are. That's the strategy here. So anyway, it's clearly we're close. People want this, and we're doing it for other reasons, and maybe it could be leveraged for voting, but voting is really tricky.
Yeah, I think these are important issues, and I don't want to diminish them at all. But in terms of the sort of impact that pushing out more digital technologies towards the domain of government could have, I think as important as voting is, it's a relatively infrequent event, and it's not clear what the enhanced or increased utility is for providing people this extra step of convenience. What I'd rather see is more emphasis around transparency of what government is actually doing, transparency around what we're spending tax dollars on, transparency around actually figuring out where there is waste and where there are needs. And I think to a great extent, part of the problems that we have in governance and in policy is that we have a lot of ignorance in terms of what's going on. We don't have a lack of data. We have a lack of ignorance. And because in some sense, there's almost too much data. The numbers are out there somewhere. We need better tools to actually tease out the knowledge. I had a conversation
with Eric Schmidt from Google a few months ago because CNN was involved in an effort to track the stimulus spending and tie it to jobs created. And it was an impossible task for CNN with all its resources to do. Although Eric Schmidt said the technology exists to have done it. If the government had subscribed to a system whereby everything that was done in the stimulus met a criteria and that criteria was digitally tracked, we could actually today press a button and say, these are exactly the jobs that were created, at least the direct jobs that were created.
With all due respect, Eric is talking about a simpler problem, and that is, can you come up with a retrieval system that can actually retrieve all of the raw data if it's properly done? And that's the easy part.
That's the easy part.
What's more difficult is actually teasing out some wisdom from that.
Right.
And what are we actually accomplishing the goals that we set out? Are we spending money wisely,
We endlessly
or are we
talk
wasting
about
it?
this on TV and the radio, so at least if we had all that data, then the same people who pontificate about everything
It's a first step.
using
Absolutely.
information. I mean, it might just make the conversation smarter.
That's actually being addressed by combinations of groups right now. It's triggered by the current administration's Open Government Directive.
Yep.
It's proving to be more painful than people thought. On the nonprofit side, there's Sunlight Foundation, which pays other people to write software which grabs that data and turns it into something that you can actually look at and make sense of. A disclaimer is that I'm involved with Sunlight, but they're getting results. And they're actually getting results much more cheaply than anyone in the government predicted.
And interestingly, none of you here really seem to be all that concerned, or maybe I'm just mishearing you, that government's on the front of this.
The government's on the...
That government's on the front end of this, that government leads these efforts. In other words, to your point, Nathan, there's sort of a purity of just letting the market dictate what the needs are, and if at some point, I guess voting doesn't really count in that front because the market's not going to dictate that need. But generally speaking, governments haven't been at the front end of determining the efficiencies of the digital world.
I think it actually, Chris said it very well. I think governments are generally, their traditional role is one of roadblock and obstacle. And that's absolutely, he's absolutely dead on when it comes to regulation and mobile banking. And I think that's true in a huge range of other sectors. So I think that actually summarizes my opinion right now.
It's a good question. It generated a lot of different little side streets. Have we got any other questions up here? Go ahead.
So I wanted to take this back to the developing world. You were going to wear that hat, and we spoke about how there are differences in culture. There's differences in the technology that's available to them. There's differences in their sense of privacy and all of that. And we're talking about building an architecture, but this architecture is global, I expect. I'd like to hear from you guys what you think are the differences in how that architecture is implemented in the developing world, what the differences might be in the experience, the technology, how you architect it, all of that.
Okay. Nathan, you want to start with you since you just talked about this?
Sure. I heard a couple different questions there. First, in terms of just thinking about the individual target consumer / producer, the individual living in these regions. You kind of have to cater to the technology they have at their disposal. What's exciting is that the majority of our species are now carrying around one of these handheld devices, these mobile phones. But these phones are not iPhones. They're generally these $15 gray market Nokia devices. And so if you're catering to that particular, if that's your lowest common denominator in terms of technology, there's specific things that you can offer these consumers / producers, and there's some things that they simply can't do. I can go on a huge. I can spend a lot of time talking about SMS-based apps and how you can start connecting people via SMS. But the other side of your question I thought was even more intriguing, and that's the privacy implications and how people have a different approach on privacy. And one of the byproducts of the majority of our species carrying around these devices is that there's just an incredible amount of data. We are just inundated with behavioral data coming from every country on Earth. And that behavioral data is coming from people moving around from one cell tower to another cell tower, people sending that text message, people buying a little bit of airtime. Mobile phone operators are aggregating just data sets that would blow a social scientist's mind. And there's an open question about how that data should be used. In this country, I have an iPhone, and so if I wanted to call up AT&T and say, hey, I'd love to have that data about my behavior. I'd love to know, what my traces were, where was my location. I've done this. They say no. The only way that data can be used beyond sending me bills is in the court of law against me, right? So it can be used by someone saying, look, he was at the scene of the crime. And there's something fundamentally really wrong with that. And so what I would love to be able to see is a mechanism so that it's not these massive corporations that own and guard this data and are continually trying to figure out ways to monetize it, but rather it's the individual consumers/producers, the people who are generating these petabytes of data, and providing. And what I would love to see is a marketplace. And so we could actually see what the differences are in terms of privacy, both across cultures and across generations, from what Craig was saying. How much does this data worth to one individual?
Does this happen particularly well anywhere? Like, is there
a market yet?
Country well, not even if there's a market, but is there somebody who, if we had a market, you'd see as the best player? Are there best practices around the freedom of access to your own data or to everybody else's data?
This is something where things are just kicking off. As far as I know, there's no one entity that I would feel comfortable saying they've got it right.
Interesting.
One quick footnote just to what you're saying in terms of just the amount of information that's created. Eric Schmidt has a quote, and I don't know what his sources are, but so you'll have to ask him. But he says that we create every 2 days just as much data and information as we created in all of human history up until 2003. Yeah. But every 2 days, we create as much information as was created up until 2003. And that doesn't mean it's intelligible. That doesn't necessarily mean it's useful. But nonetheless, I mean, the sheer amount of information that's being created by the number of people and devices that's being used on a global level is just, I mean, truly unprecedented.
I hate that quote because it got a whole bunch of people at CNN to say, can Ali come on TV and tell us what that information is?
Yeah.
No idea. It just makes my head hurt to think about it. He was talking about major corporations controlling stuff. Would you want to say something?
Yeah, I do. I just want to go back to the original question about the cultural challenges, I think, especially in emerging markets and other developing countries. I'll just take another pivot on this, okay? Not a technical one, but more an emotional one. One of the questions is the technology we're building really mapping to the cultures that we're serving? And we end up usually biasing what we build based on our own experiences. And so there's a very Western bent to a lot of the way things are done. I know that in some cultures, parents and elders play a big role in decision making. And a lot of times, I think a lot of the social networks we try to create often are around empowerment of the individual, which is actually not something that's held up as a huge value. It's the opposite. It's really respecting the family, respecting the elders, and pulling them into important life choices. And so to what degree have we really enabled that with the tools that we're offering? I don't think many people have really investigated this, especially in these markets. And if you actually look at the Declaration of Human Rights, there's a whole section on the right to an education, and there's a carve-out for parents. It says parents have the right to choose for their children what they experience. And I don't think our technologies have really addressed some fundamental ways people, in some places, expect it to work. So I'll throw it out there as a challenge for new systems.
Whatever it did, it got a whole bunch of people's hands up. Let's start with you, sir.
Yes, thanks, Ali. Actually, I was just about to ask the question when you started talking, Jeff, about how are we going to avoid overuse of digital products. I mean, as we sit here, many audience members are checking their Blackberries and iPhones, and sometimes you're talking with someone and they're just checking in the corner of their eyes. And when I teach medical students, I can see as I'm giving lectures, they are doing things on the side, and they're more likely to text each other than to just say, why don't we just go for a walk in the park? How about just get together as a family, have dinner? But everybody is so busy, and part of being busy is that we do more things, we generate more data, we do things. Are there ways we can sort of put a hold on overdoing this?
Yeah, so I'll point out that this brings up the possible area of parental controls, which again are very nascent, mostly on the web, and pretty inadequate for the most part. As a parent, I know I have 3 kids, and I try very hard to monitor what they do and how they get to places. And currently, there's a very weak age verification piece to all these systems. And they're onto systems that really are beyond their age comprehension in many cases. And when I set parental controls for how much time they get to have on the computer, What does my child do? They actually go through what's called the BIOS and change the system clock to a time they're allowed to use it. So now it's the whack-a-mole. I now go in and I say, fine, I'm putting a password on the BIOS so you can't get in there. What does he do? He opens up the case, pulls out the battery on the motherboard, and it resets the password. So he takes over again. And he's 12, okay? So that's a 12-year-old's view of the world. Parents don't stand a chance. Yeah. And so we really have so much more to do if we really want to empower good practices, possibly with parents helping out.
I really share this concern and worry about it a lot. There's a New York Times series that recently came out on some of the effects of digital technology on the brain. There's a book that, for anyone interested in this topic, called The Shallows, written by this guy Nicholas Carr. And there seems to be an emerging body of research which shows that the way that we use these digital technologies really changes our brains. Neurologically, they optimize for much more information in short-term memory, which we'd like to believe just makes us smarter, but actually can really hamper our ability to concentrate and to really focus on problems or books. There's one of the best documented studies that exists is they have two people read a short story. And one of them reads it, or two groups read a short story. One group reads the story just old school on paper, you know, the way we've been reading for a few hundred years. The other group reads it with hyperlinks. Just really simple hyperlinks, not even iPad version which can have videos in it and pictures and everything else. And what they found is not only did it take the group with hyperlinks longer to read the story, but when they came out, not only did they not understand the story as well, but as a group actually score lower on comprehension, they actually felt worse. They didn't feel as good about the experience because it wasn't an experience for them. It was much more disjointed. So I think it's a really good example, and it illustrates that we have to be really thoughtful about how we use technology in general as a people and how we teach our kids to use, or hopefully at sometimes not to use, technology. And so I would love to see more people work on a digital curriculum and really values and standard settings. I'd love to see people try to have a digital day off, like a Sunday where you turn off TVs or phones. There's these trends that are starting to emerge, and I think that they're really, really important.
It's fascinating to hear this sort of conversation from a group that is obviously unabashedly in support of a more digital world, but I think that's interesting. Tonight we're airing something on CNN about bullying, a series on bullying, and if you'd asked me, I would have said bullying must have diminished since I was a kid. Because probably nobody could have been bullied more than I was. But I just would have thought we'd have sort of advanced. And the fact is, the growth in cyberbullying is so dramatic by virtue of the fact that in the old days, there was a psychological element to bullying someone. You bullied them, you saw a reaction, you maybe even got the reaction you wanted, and you might have moved on. In the world of cyberbullying, they're saying the problem is not the being bullied, it's the bully who doesn't actually see the impact of their work necessarily, and the impact can be so much greater. Very interesting. I never even would have applied my mind to that concept, except that somebody smarter than me at CNN thought we should actually study it, and here's what we've come up with, that bullying in the old-fashioned way is not on the increase. Bullying in the new-fashioned way is actually more detrimental. You were going to say something?
Yeah, well, first, just to kind of riff off what you just said, I think people who've been online for a number of years, maybe even decades, like in my case, we're very familiar with the sort of flaming personas that can take over when people are angry on the web, and that's one side of it. You know, when you're stripping the experience from the emotional and human connection, you can actually lose the humanity that's on the other side, and that's a problem that. You know, I think we haven't really fully come to terms with. But, you know, like the issue that you raised is, you know, this is purely anecdotal, but I see it in myself as well. I hate the fact that I feel like my attention span is constantly challenged because the media that I'm consuming is so bite-sized, and I'm longing for a meal when I'm in a world of hors d'oeuvres. You know, and it's troubling. I think Clay Shirky made a really interesting point when he said that, you know, we're all suffering from information overload, but he said that it was actually filter failure. It's not information overload, it's filter failure. And so I don't know that you know, it's tempting to want to blame and say there's just too much information out there. And I am one of these people that I seriously have to start limiting my consumption of different types of media, especially online. But I think we have to, the people on this stage, have to get better at actually giving tools that allow one to effectively filter in a thoughtful way.
Gary, you said that. Craig, you talked about curated media, which is certainly...
which you're down on, which he's down on, by the way.
Oh, you don't like curated media, or you like curated media? Watch what you say, because at CNN, that's kind of what we like to do.
I trust my friends to curate media for me. I now tend to trust traditional means less than I used to.
I'm just in the spirit of kind of like defining terms and making sure that we're talking about the same thing. I think most people in mainstream media think their format is curated and social media is not curated. So just to make sure we're kind of...
All the above is true. It's all in flux. And I tend to rely a lot on my Twitter stream. People will find stuff that is of interest to me. I rely a lot on my RSS stream. How is that curated,
other than the fact that you have chosen to follow some people? What's the curation in there?
My trust for the people I'm following.
Okay. Let me... I'm just going to ask one quick last question on this to you, Chris. Is Facebook, did it work because it's curated social networking?
Because it's curated social networking.
Yeah, I mean, is that what you know, when we talk about the fact that you look at MySpace and you never knew what it was, you look at Facebook, it prescribes what you put on it, it prescribes where you put things. Is that curated, or is that
Oh, I see what you're saying. No, no, I wouldn't say so. I think I mean, everybody has their different thoughts. My thoughts are the two key factors were of a feeling of trust, and the fact that it was about being your real identity online. And so on the trust part, I mean, you know, for the first 2 years, we were just in colleges in the United States and internationally. And by default, only the people at your college could actually see your information. And that was a really big thing, because elsewhere on the internet, when you shared something, you shared it with the internet. And all of a sudden, we found that if you give people privacy settings and the ability to say who is going to see this photo album or this phone number or this reflection, they'll be much more likely to share. So I think that was the first piece. And the second piece was that there's a culture, you don't come to Facebook to make new friends. People don't do that. That's never been part of the network. You come to Facebook to connect with the friends that you already have and to communicate with them day in and day out. And so there's a sense of real identity there and a replication of pre-existing social networks, which, you know, if you think back to 2004, 5, 6, when there were just a lot of these players in the field, none of the others really had. Yeah. So I think it's more that than, you know, the classic sort of Facebook was blue and one color, easy to digest, and MySpace was just crazy. That I actually think was less important.
Sir. It's good. It's working.
My question is there a darker side? I mean, the assumption is that there's a benign government here, or, you know, there's a democratic government where, you know, all the data and all the activity can, you know, formulate freedom of expression. But if you have a dictatorship or a government that wants to control the population or get more data and so on, then there is a danger there in terms of all this information, and the data that the impact it would have in terms of controlling certain populations or certain groups or ethnicities and so on.
Absolutely.
It's a very good big question that you're asking. We certainly saw last year in Iran that certainly at CNN we had been kicked out. We had a presence in Iran for a long time. We were finally kicked out, and we were able to gather information just by virtue of the fact that people were sending it out through social media, and the government of Iran couldn't actually switch off the lights on internet because they, in fact, are too integrated into it. The only way to actually switch it off was to switch off all internet access, and they couldn't do that, which is different than North Korea, where they're not integrated into the rest of the world, so it doesn't matter and they can control it better. But obviously with China, we've seen this issue come up over and over again. Who wants to tackle this?
Well, I'll take a crack at this a little bit. I started off with this introduction to end-to-end trust, and it is a big problem space about how do you make the internet safer, more trusted. When you've got scenarios where people are at risk, where their personal freedoms could be eroded,
you need to look at some of the scenarios that might support what they want to do. We call it secure collaboration. All right, so in some contexts, because of the environment you're in or because of the players involved, you want to have more control over who sees what and access and so on and so forth. Again, you could use these claims that I talked about to just say I'm a member of the organization without identifying who you are and have the ability to communicate, be part of that membership, and not have the risk, the personal risk, associated with, say, a regime coming in to see what your behavior is. So we think these building blocks are really important if we want to preserve human rights. You need the full suite of this stuff. It's not just fully identified, it's not fully anonymous, there's stuff in between where you're members of groups and then you're part of the community and you can get the job done while lowering your personal risk.
You guys have any views on that?
Well, I'm worried, like the person who asked the question, that there can be risk with one entity controlling the data, especially when you start thinking about manipulation and control. I'm far more worried, however, about the darkness of that emerges when information doesn't flow. So if you think about all of the historic tragedies that have occurred from totalitarian governments that went effectively unrecorded, all the hundreds of millions of people that have died from events like that, I think that is something that is far worse and far more, a much greater risk to humanity. So there's a certain, like you had mentioned with some of the events in the Middle East and elsewhere, there's a certain sense of security that kind of emerges to knowing that the world might be watching. And I think that we saw a relatively peaceful transformation of Eastern Bloc countries because of the maturity of television networks in the late 80s. And I think around the world, the maturity of cell phone networks and the internet could possibly play a similar role.
Yeah, I do worry a bit about bad filtration of information rather than suppression. The deal is that sometimes people, like, say at the Washington Post, had a guy named Walter Pincus who was reporting this weapons of mass destruction stuff, needed another look, but that was suppressed with possibly unfortunate consequences.
We're going to take a final question from right over here. If we can just take a mic over, yeah.
Well, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to see you, all of you, personally, some of you. I've just returned to the United States. I have lived in a Latin American country for 21 years, and we're now working with emerging countries and Latin America. Mainly the concern is security and confidentiality, and first the plus and then the negative side, but truly the plus outweighs any negative that you may consider under the circumstances of communication. But the positive end is that in Latin America, there's nothing else or other way to communicate but these machines that we carry with us. The boom of the 80s and the 90s, the way of doing business, the fax machine did not exist in many places, or even telephones that work, because if you mentioned lack of infrastructure. So people are desperately in need to communicate, and Facebook has become a true eye-opening. You can find people that you've never seen before or haven't seen for 30 years. So you have not realized yet the impact you made in the world from very young children on. And concerning the children or the young minds of today, which we have to preserve, and education is so important. The lack of reading there is, and the lack of concentration. I happen to be a mother of 5 between 27 and 12 years of age, and 3 of my children were raised in Latin America. And the invasion of telecommunications in my country, where I was from originally, which is Argentina, has brought out a world from CNN, which was our only international communication we had available. So there's no buts about it. We have to go forward from here. But we have to certainly key on values and security and safety, because people are concerned, very truly concerned in all the emerging countries. So thank you very much.
It strikes me that the security part of things is almost easier, because there are ways to fix that. The values question opens up a whole can of worms, because whose values? Who decides And does the market police itself sufficiently that values will emerge, or is this a world free, sort of absent of values?
The network, people just interact with each other as people, and individuals do a better job of working with their values than anything I'm going to say. I figure that we're all responsible for our own set of values. Values are very different in other cultures, and for sure I'm not going to do anything about imposing my values on anyone else.
Anybody disagree?
I could take a contrarian position if you want at the same time, but...
Well, we've already got 2 Craigs. I already elected another one. All right, well, this has been a very thought-provoking conversation on a very big topic, and I appreciate the contribution that you've made with some fantastic questions, and the fact that we have such a varied group up here, all of whom are digital pioneers, and I almost wish, you know, we'll revisit this with the same group in 5 years and look back and see what's changed, because it'll be such a different world. We will be close to having entirely digital elections in your world, and we'll have new networks that are being started up, and people in the developing world will have used cell phone technology to prosper. We'll see how Jumo is doing at that point, and you'll be an old guy. You'll be a veteran in the world of digital technology, and we'll be safer.
One hopes.
One hopes. Or something can go wrong, but I would like to revisit that with you all. Thanks so much, not only for being here, but for the contribution that you've all made, and thank you all for great conversations and for being here.